Good morning and welcome to this first webinar of this cycle on governance, territories, and protected areas.
Estamos aquí desde la Escuela Latinoamericana, perdón, de Áreas Protegidas de la UCI, de la Universidad
We
Politécnica
are
Nacional.
from the
Y
University for
este
International
es
Cooperation,
el programa,
working
un
along
programa
with the
coordinado por la
Latin
IAPA.
American School of Protected Areas, along with the
Vamos a dar inicio
FAO, and now
al
we're going
webinar
to
de
start to
hoy
this today's
con los
webinar
mecanismos efectivos de
on
gobernanza.
efficient governance
En un
mechanisms.
ratito
And in a
vamos a
little
compartir
while,
algunos
I
detalles
will be sharing more details about our
Alan, no sé
speakers.
si comenzaste
Alan, I don't know if you'd like to start.
con la apertura formal desde IAPA.
Good morning. Someone says that, can you please let us know if you can listen to the interpretation? So you can listen in three languages, Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Or Diana, you'll have to check your audio because everyone else is listening. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to this event. As Chris said, we're going to have a series of webinars, so hopefully we'll see you during the next days. We're going to have one per week at the same time for Thursdays and then on Fridays during the month of August. So these are the topics that we will be seeing. Today, we're going to see the efficient mechanisms for governance of protected areas, and we will be focusing on interaction of protected areas on border areas. And we're going to have different topics that we'll be sharing with you, and hopefully you'll participate. First, I would like to provide you some context because these webinars will be developed within the framework of a course that we have now. We're in the process of cooperating with the IAPA or the integration of the Amazon protected area and some other partners, including the Alliance working on the Amazonia on governance. And Claudio Marin, the representative of the IAPA project. And Bernardo, can you name her as co-host because she will be sharing part of this context about this project so that we can start. Thank you. And I'd like to ask you all to please mute your microphones because we're going to have over 500 people. So if we all have our mics, then we will be have some problems. And if you have questions, please use the chat for this purpose. You can write them down over there, and we're going to try to answer to as many questions as possible. And if there are some questions that we cannot answer, then we'll gather all of them and then we'll. Can you please mute all your microphones, as I just said, so we don't have interferences? And if we cannot answer to all the questions during today's activity, which might be the case because we're going to have so many questions, we'll try and share the answers later on. And for those who are students of these courses, please, if you are going to make questions, please let us know that you are students because that's really important for us because this is part of a course and we want for students to be identified as such. And basically, since this is such an important topic and all the protected area community in Latin America has been talking to us about the need for to go deeper into this governance, we want to have an open session that we think are going to be very useful. And we'll start with Claudia Marin on this IAPA project. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, everyone. It's so good to see over 200 people participating, people from all regions related to protected areas that are interested in this governance topic that is so relevant for the region. And on behalf of the IAPA project and all its partners, financed by the European Union and the FIO, WWF, PNUMA, the UNDP, we are a group, and this is the reason why we are here as part of this cooperation network in the region, We'd like to welcome you all to this series of webinars. As Alan was saying, this is a very relevant topic that has been identified by all the stakeholders and officers and all people related to the protected areas to and this is what we would like to address today, along with some specific cases that we'll be covering throughout all these webinars so that we can go deeper into this topic. And hopefully, these spaces will become this great community of governance in the region and maybe in the long term, this will become our working space where we can work together, cooperate, and define those mechanisms for participations that are going to be more frequent. Because I know that these webinars are going to call the attention. All topics are relevant, as well as the cases that we'll cover that are going to be very useful. We're going to have different institutions related to the same topic. So please take advantage of everything that we're going to offer. And this way, we can be a part of this great community around these protected areas and governance. So I just wanted to welcome you once again. And we are here in order to strengthen all the actions in the region and to keep on strengthening this network of parks. And on behalf of the European Union, we welcome you. And hopefully, as Alan said, you'll all participate in all the webinars. So have a wonderful session, and we'll be here if you need anything. Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. This webinar is being broadcasted on YouTube. So we're going to give you the address on the chat if you want to follow us there and if you cannot connect to this Zoom. Chris?
Muchas gracias, Alan. Muchas gracias,
Thank you.
Claudia, a ambos.
And
Entonces, bueno,
thank you,
para dar
Ala, and thank you,
visibilidad a más
Claudia. I
personas,
know that we
vamos a
see more and more
pedir
participants.
24
We already
participantes
have
en esta
234
sesión.
participants
Entonces,
currently.
voy a ir a
So
dar la bienvenida para todas, para
once
todos.
again,
Solo algunas
welcome everyone.
indicaciones
And just a couple of
más.
indications.
Como comentamos, este webinar
As we
está
said,
en el marco del
this
curso de gobernanza
webinar
que
is
hemos
part of
venido
these
desarrollando
governance
ya
courses that we
varios
have
años
been
con
developing
varios países del mundo.
with all our
Queremos a nuestros estudiantes
partners. And we'd like
del
to
curso de
ask
gobernanza
again
que
our
están acá
students
presentes que por favor se
to
nombren
please identify themselves
estudiante,
as
primero por favor,
such. Maybe you
mencionar
can use your name, last name, and then
luego
indicate that you are
presentarse
students. And I will ask everyone that
micrófonos
joining to
cerrados
please
y preguntas
close your
solamente
microphones. And if you have questions, please write them down on the chat that you have in the horizontal menu. And I would like to ask our speakers to prepare themselves. We're going to have Guillermo first, Diana, and then Stanley. I'll introduce you. As, um, as I said, this meeting will be recorded and then we'll be sharing them on all our different channels and social media. So as Alan said, if you have questions for the speakers as they start making their presentations, please write them down on the chat and then we'll have this dynamic. And please, once again, close your microphones because we have too many people. And if you want to make a question, please indicate who the question is for. So we'll start today with the efficient governance and mechanisms. And we're going to have three cases today. One from Brazil, from Guillermo Estupiñán from Brazil. And then we're going to have a case from Venezuela presented by Diana Porras. And last, we're going to have a case from Costa Rica presented by Stanley Arigatos. So we're going to have approximately 20 minutes per presentation, and then in the order that I just mentioned, and then we're going to have a question and answer session, and then we will be closing our meeting in a couple of hours at 10 a.m. Costa Rican time. So, Guillermo, would you like to share your screen? And then Guillermo is a biologist from the University of Mato Grosso, Brazil, with a master's in continental systems from the Amazonia, and then he works on public policy for the conservation planning and monitoring, and with emphasis on the different conservation themes and protected areas. And currently, he's working for the Conservation Society in Brazil as part of the different focuses of the Amazonia. Guillermo will be presenting now on this case of the Lower Rio Negro mosaic. So thank you, Guillermo, and welcome. Thank you for your time. And then you're going to have 20 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're running out of time. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. I am going to talk about this experience that I have. I have been working in governance on this territory for over 15 years. This is a great territory, and this is the Lower Rio Negro mosaic here in Brazil. I am in Brazil, where I work, and Peruvian, but so this is the reason why I'm speaking in Spanish. I thought I was going to present in Portuguese, but I'm going to make my presentation in Spanish. The Rio Negro Basin is one of the most important basins, and is a very special one when it comes to culture, diversity, and many other things. And this is the second basin to contribute with water to the Amazonia River, the Madeira River also, but well, we have an approximately like 15 and 14% water contribution to this to the Amazonia River. This is a basin that has 71 million hectares. It covers 4 countries that share this territory. And the diversity, as you can imagine, is very important as well. And we also have a biological and social environmental diversity. We've seen many things like possibilities where we could have action and management and implementation of social technologies for the well-being of these people and also the environment. The Rio Negro has another important characteristics that which is that in the city of Manaus, which is the biggest city on the Amazonia, we have approximately 2.5 million inhabitants, so it's a very big city. And it's like an important hub for the reception of people and natural resources, and it puts pressure as well on this territory. And what territory am I talking to? Well, as part of the Rio Negro Basin, as you can see in the map, this is a design for this mosaic of protected areas of the lower Rio Negro. And these are 11 protected areas, and this mosaic was recognized along in 2010 along with its council, because in Brazil we have the protected areas in addition to the important organization responsible for the management. Then we also have this council that plays the role of identifying this shared management of these territories. So currently, this mosaic has officially, as I said, 11 areas, but during the last meeting, we included 3 additional protected areas. So currently we have 14 protected areas that are all part of this same mosaic. And then this territory is going to have 7.9 million hectares in total. So for example, Costa Rica has 5.1 million hectares. So it's bigger than the Costa Rican territory in terms of hectares. And the diversity is so important because access to be this region can only be accessed from the Rio Negro and from other reserves. So it's the complexity when it comes to logistics is very high.
Vamos apagar los micrófonos, por favor.
Can you please mute your microphones? We have 14 protected areas in different levels of managers. We have federal managers for 4 protected areas that are municipal areas. And then 3 of them are part of the municipality of Manaus, and we also have one from Rio Negro, and the other 7 are part of the state. So in total, 5 municipalities are part of this territory. And it's important to say that this territory has an important position with the other territories when it comes to conservation. For example, the natural site for the different heritage, and then the corridors and the reserve of the biosphere of the central Amazon, and then the Ramsar Regional Rio Negro, which is a new experience that we have now in Brazil that are part of these protected areas. And they also connect other areas like indigenous regions and other type of protected areas that we have currently in Brazil as well. So our complexity is quite interesting, and I would say positive because in addition, we also have a governance structure in the territory that is currently represented by the Rio Negro Network, which is a group of organizations. I would say 17 organizations, and we are in the process of mobilizing this network once again because of these new territories that are now part of this basin, and also due to the needs of these people to mobilize themselves. And this is the reason why we are now discussing the self-management of these territories. And we also share other mosaics in Brazil, for example, the ones that Rio Negro is also a part of. So the mission, which is part of this decree, is to consolidate the integrated management of the protected areas of the lower Rio Negro by promoting the empowerment of social actors and the sustainability and public policies that will going to respect the particularities of this territory. So it's quite big, and this is a way in which we would like to include as part of this mission the objectives of the individual units, because we have 14 protected areas, and each one of them is going to have its own autonomy when it comes to their management tools, because each one of them can have a management or zoning plan and also its own monitoring and council, which could be for consultation purposes as well. So this mosaic would like to observe all these territories at individual level and try to capture whatever is necessary and important in order to manage such a big territory in an integrated manner. So this has led to an important mobilization from the first meetings of the council that took place back in 2011. So currently, this is one of the most active mosaics and also one of the most active, as I said, and with the most tools that are being currently implemented as part of these 26 mosaics that we currently have recognized in Brazil. So we have this group, which is the council for this mosaic, with 14 members, and they meet at least 3 times per year. Well, that was the case until 2019, when we started with or we were able to meet face to face and go to visit the communities because of all the reasons that we are all aware of until this pandemic came, along with everything that it implied. And it has been a challenge for all of us to be able to continue with our actions and with our work. And in addition to this pandemic, we are restarting these with these actions because we have delays that were very serious on these populations and all the territories, both on indigenous territories and many others, like the Cimarrones. And in addition, we, since 2019, started a process for the participation and representation in Brazil because of a degree that is now extinct for all the councils, groups, panels, and everything related to the discussions that these groups can have, and such as social movements and as many people that we could have to discuss all these topics at the different levels. But currently, some of these have been recreated, not all of them, but we have now created with some participation limitation because currently some of these groups are limited to 7 participants, for example. And for example, they can have a representation from the civil society. And then in the case of councils, for example, we can have a working group with the participation of government officials only. And this has motivated us to look back and try to maintain this fire alive for the mobilization and participation and representation. So, as you can imagine, it has not been an easy task, but we have been able to meet with the Council of the Mosaic, even though it is now extinct legally. Legally, it does not exist, but the mobilization and participation have continued. I think that this is going to be permanent in spite of this pandemic, but we have been able to maintain this communication and contact with people and to keep on working. So these are some of the documents that we have. This is an action plan. And then I am going to try and explain this because this was the organizational structure for the mosaic. It was quite linear and just for decision-making purposes. So there was this subject that we needed to discuss, and we discussed it with all the participants, and then we made a decision. But we saw this need, considering the lack of resources. We needed this integrated vision. So we presented some proposals, and now we have this new model for the organizational structure and governance. And this is the council that we have with the A function for management and decision-making purposes, but also as the executor of all these projects that are part of the mosaic. Officially, the council is not a legal corporation and they cannot capture resources. So, but the members of the council and other organizations can get the resources to apply to the projects that are part of the mosaic. So the governance scheme make this a project to be discussed within the mosaic by a group that is going to be working together with the institutions, and then they are going to get their resources needed. They are going to raise the funds, and then through a group with the different organizations that they are working on this project with, they are going to do this in an aggregated manner. And then we have a follow-up of the processes, monitoring, implementation, results, and application. So this has allowed us to raise funds for this mosaic, but these are allocated to the project. So what we really need is for these mosaics to be recognized as a line of resources for specific financing on behalf of governments, and for the different support systems that we already have. So in terms of the tools that are going to help us keep this flame alive, we need to have the management, we need to analyze what is going on, and then we already have an action plan that is currently being implemented. And excuse me, we have 5 programs and different sub-programs, and 2 of them are currently being implemented. And we also have a monitoring plan for the lower Rio Negro mosaic to involve the people for the monitoring and the use of resources, and they have been the most important tools in order to maintain this integration with people. The participation and also research is very important because they are associated to the use of resources directly and to conservation as well. And we have other programs that are going to help the mobilization of people and also in association to the use of resources, because fishing is one of the most important activities in the territory. This is a national park of Anavilanas, and around the park we have 10,000 people living that are using this park directly for fishing purposes. So we are working with different groups to try and create a project, and we're also working with the LIDA group and with other institutions, and also from the social sustainability organizations in Brazil. And we are currently working in order to come up with a commitment to try and solve this conflict when it comes to the use of the land. But we definitely need to solve this, and we also have economic alternative, and it's important to promote them because we have different experiences when it comes to the production, for example, of cosmetics and other products like pharmaceutical products at a lower scale, but it has great potential. And we also have sport fishing and other types of activities that are being handled here on some of these reserves. And hopefully this will be done the right way and it will be fair for everyone. And we also have actions. Yeah, I know I have 3 minutes. Thank you. And we also have actions for the involvement and inclusion of young people on the use of technological tools and different types of equipment to try and improve communication, because we know that this will be a very good practice, and we need the knowledge of the minimum things that we need to know. And we also have digital inclusion, that all of these pictures that I'm showing you were taken during the pandemic. So hopefully we're going to have all people vaccinated. We're working on the different protocols to try and start with our essential activities. And when it comes to digital inclusion, it has been a very interesting initiative for the people and leaders that can be involved in training, communication, and so on. And edu communication is very important and has contributed to the involvement and participation of all these young people that are more and more interested in what goes on their territories. And we also have the different workshops on radio communication. So, of course, we need more time to implement them, and we are currently waiting to improve this pandemic. And as final considerations, since 2010, we have been working on an integrated vision, and I would say that it's currently quite mature in the region. We are aware of the fact that conservation and articulation with the social movements need to go hand in hand, and this is what we are trying to do when it comes to the management of the territory and the improvement of the quality of life in the region. We need more involvement with the municipalities, and this is something that we need to keep on working on. There is room for improvement. 5 municipalities that we have, but 2 of them are the ones that are most involved. And of course, we will also have the need for these technical things on protected areas, and we're going to have more and more people interested, mainly from the federal organizations. And we are currently looking for specific financial resources, and hopefully we'll come to a day when we're going to have enough resources. And we need to have more options of productive networks to involve more people and to have more debate about self-management and other mechanisms of social participation to maintain everything. Thank you for your attention, and I will be here if you have any questions. And this is my contact information and the mosaic and all the information on protected areas and social inclusion, and all the different encounters that we are going to have on this same topic. We're going to have this in November, so you have the information over there. Thank you.
Perfecto. Muchísimas,
Perfect time in
muchísimas gracias.
20 minutes and 45 seconds. Thank you, Guillermo. Very, very interesting presentation. We all are aware of how important this mosaic is in the region in order to recover all the experiences and lessons learned and to know what are the challenges that we have. So thank you again for all the information. And I see already questions popping up on the chat. And after the 3 presentations, we're going to open a Q&A session. So we'll start with Diana Porras now. Can you open your presentation and start screen sharing? Diana, can you hear me? Diana is from Venezuela, from the INPARQUES, the National Park System from Venezuela. Diana, are you with us? Yes, good morning. Can you share your presentation, please? She will be talking about the experience in the preparation of the zoning plan and the regulations for use of the National Park Chorro El Indio in the state of Tachera in Venezuela. We have their presentation. So Diana is a biologist from the experimental faculty of the University of Maracaibo, Venezuela. And she works for INPARQUES in the region of Táchira in Venezuela. So without further ado, Diana, thank you for being with us. She is also a student of our governance course, and she is in charge of INPARQUES in Táchira. So Diana, you have 20 minutes. And I'll let you know when you have 3 minutes, so you can start closing. I am Diana Porras, and I am going to present the experience that we have in the state of Táchira. at the Chorro El Indio National Park, and which have been the lessons learned and the challenges that we had to face with the involvement of the different stakeholders to look for a consensus in the participation and preparation of this zoning plan. In, in Venezuela, we have these areas under a particular management scheme, and according to the law, these are areas that are part of the national territory that are under a special management regime. And we have 20 categories, and national parks and national monuments are managed by INPARQUES. And at national level, we manage 43 national parks, 37 natural monuments, and 65 recreation parks, which you can see distributed on the map and screen. When it comes to the management of the Tachera state and its parks, we have a state near the border with Colombia, and we manage 5 national parks here. A national park that is in Acuri, which is Rio Viejo San Camilo, and other 4 that we have on the Táchira state, El Tamá, Pablo Peñalosa, Chorro el Indio, and the natural monument Abra Rio Frío. In summary, the most important characteristics of these parks, we have El Tamá, that was declared a national park in 1978, with a surface of 139,145 hectares, and it has, of course, a zoning plan. It's binational because it has a part in Colombia. And for the first time, we had oil here, and then we have Juan Pablo Peñalosa that was declared in 1989, and it has the same zoning plan. The maximum height is 3,942 meters above sea level, and it's very interesting because it has approximately 120 lagoons that have and we also have a Chorro El Indio that was declared in 1989 with a surface of 11,000 hectares. And this is the smallest of all the parks. And it's in the metropolitan city of San Cristobal. And we also have Tapocaparo, which is the biggest of them all, with a surface of 205,000 hectares. And we also have the natural monument Abra Rio Frío that was declared in 1992. And it's quite small, with a surface of 1,325 hectares, but it's interesting because it's an area of contact between the occidental areas of Venezuela and the Andes. So it's important to mention the potential that we have when it comes to research on all these parks. And when it comes to the tools that we use and the experience, we have a zoning plan and use regulations. So it's important to mention that this is a technical and legal tool when it comes to planning, which is fundamental for the sustainability of the parks. And it establishes the guidelines for the management and also the articulation of all the stakeholders. And this is the reason why this type of tools should be the ones that allow to establish the regulations for the use in order for my zoning to work and for the plan to be complied with, and also to have administrative control and also decision making. When it comes to El Indio, we have this tool, but it can result in an inappropriate use. And one what we have in the park is precisely this, because it has a partial decree of the organic law for the zoning of the territory on administration and management of national parks and natural monuments, which is decree number 276. And then you have here a satellite image of the national park that we have. And in blue, we have water. And the national park is divided naturally by Sierra La Maravilla here in the center. And we have two areas. And we have here the city of San Cristobal and the municipality of Cárdenas. And it has a great water potential because we have creeks here and rivers. And it's important to mention as well that we also have a tunnel here that supply has the supply of water for 70% of the population. And we also have ecological resources where we have important elements when it comes to flora and fauna, for example. And some of them are about to be extinct. So this is a very important area. They are endangered, some of these flora and fauna. So first, we have an important demographic growth. As you can see in this image, this is not new. This has a few years. So you can see here where we have more population, but we also have deforestation, solid and liquid waste, and many things, and the use of agricultural techniques that are not environmentally friendly, and many other factors that have affected this situation, and also the pandemic and the country situation has resulted in bigger problems. And it's important to mention that this park has physical and natural characteristics because of its geology. Most of the park is a part of the La Quinta area with high fragility, erosion, and the soil is prone to any type of intervention, as you can see here, where we can have these types of slides as well. What was our route? Well, we established 3 stages. The first was information gathering, analysis of variables to monitor, and tools. And as you can see here in the picture, we see the development of this stage that started 6 years ago. We needed to see what was in the park, what we could find in the park, and who the producers work inside the park as well. And unfortunately, these results, as you can see in the picture, we saw some landslides and some other things, like I mentioned, like erosion, garbage, agricultural borders, demographic pressure, and many other things. And as you can see in this picture, something that we found is what we see here on the trees, that the people create a ring around the tree, and then it rottens and they fall. And this is a common practice here. So this is going to affect the ecosystem and the loss of vegetation and soil contamination and many other things. And as for the second stage, we will focus on the legal basis or foundation of the organization. And this is where we found our first challenge. And in here, you can see the main regulations that we use for the development of this tool. But first, we use the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the use of the territory, the organic law for the environment, and the law for the National Park Institute, and the partial regulation of the organic law for the zoning of the territory and administration and management of national parks and natural monuments. But as I said, this was our first challenge to see how we can get the attention of the different stakeholders, because of this was our first shock, because we did not know how to approach the community. We went to the communities, we worked with universities, but there was not this real interest in participating on the preparation of this regulation for the zoning. So what did we do? Well, we had to come up with strategies in order to get their attention and their involvement. So we started with workshops, forums, and conferences, and we participated on many different activities. And we have information workshops also, where we can train people about a zoning plan and why is it necessary and why was it so important for stakeholders to work on this project along with us. As for stage number 3, this was based on the results that we attained for the proposal for this zoning plan as such, and as for challenges and achievements when it comes to organization and capacity. As for organization, we started knocking on doors because some of the stakeholders were still reluctant to participate, but we insisted with our same initial goal to show what would happen if we were to lose these parks. So we showed them some critical scenarios of what would happen if we saw an increase of these social and environmental problems in the park, because we would be left without water, and then we could have deforestation, and we would be losing important biodiversity for our state and the country as well. And on these images, we started replicating the information, and we took them to the institution and the communities, because we wanted the participation of the schools, the children, the adolescents, and this experience with them is so important because they are going to keep on diffusing this information. So we are going to use a strategy to show them what we had in the park, the biodiversity that could be found, and then we started working with them. We took them to the park, and we also work with the university students, and also with interns on community service. And we work in order to gather information, but also on campaigns in order to have or to raise awareness. You have 3 minutes left. I'm sorry to interrupt. So we involved the teachers, and when it comes to techniques, we are still meeting, and as you can see here, by then we had already articulated our work with the stakeholders, which was our first achievement, because being able to sit down with the different stakeholders and to have different political opinions. And I think that this is something very important in our country. It was really an achievement to be able to do that and to be able to talk to all of them. And we have here the zoning of the park, the zoning that we did. We have 7 protected areas. And by this point, we had already prepared everything, and we started with the socialization of the proposal for the zoning plan, which was done based on the different conversations that we have. And this is the last stage, which were the public consultation workshops where we had the proposal ready. And we also included the opinion of all participants, everyone involved. This was something more formal, as you can see in the pictures, with all the stakeholders like communities, institutions, universities, NGOs. And on this slide, you see one of our biggest achievements, because as part of this space, we were able to get the participation of the representatives of urban and rural communities, NGOs, universities, national government, regional government, local government, public institutions, private institutions. So for us, it was a very satisfactory thing, because it was not an easy task. And there, we didn't have any gender distinctions or political distinction, nationality, race. Everyone was involved, everyone participated voluntarily. And finally, the main challenges that we have for the future is to maintain this commitment on conservation for the long term with different stakeholders, and to maintain this interaction between government and non-government actors. It's important to strengthen the dialogue so that we don't lose everything that we've achieved so far. And also we need to have the financial resources, as we've heard this morning, because we need the financial resources, which is going to be a great challenge in itself, and also to maintain the capacities to be able to transfer the knowledge necessary that will allow for this sustainability in the protected areas, and also active participation, which for us is going to be a great challenge in order to remain active. And thank you for your attention, and I will be here if you have any doubts or questions. Thank you, Diana, for being a part of this webinar. A very interesting case, and we are seeing more questions popping up. So Stanley, can, can you get ready, please? Guillermo has answered some of the questions on the chat, so you can start doing that if you could help us with that. So thank you again. And now we'll continue with our next speaker, Stanley Arigatos from Costa Rica. He'll talk to us about participating and planning on a landscape scale in 6 protected areas of the OSA conservation area in Costa Rica. You might know him, but he's Costa Rican with 32 years working in protected areas in the Latin American region and the Caribbean. He started as a volunteer by structuring this program for volunteers and organization of national volunteers that it is still active today. So for 11 years, he worked as director of 3 protected areas and different programs of management, working out on the field. And he's the co-founder of the Latin American School of Protected Areas, or ELAP. He has a great experience in the region, and he has been one of the founders for everyone that is involved in protected areas conservation in Latin America. So thank you for being here with us. And of course, he is a part of the ELAP and academic coordinator of all these projects for the development of capacities that we have in the framework of the projects that we are working. And Stanley is going to present on a video that was previously recorded. Everything was fine, and we're going to share it now.
Bien, mi nombre es Stanley Arigatos
I
y
am
voy a
Stanley
presentar
Arigatos, and I am going to talk about an experience that is the participating planning on a landscape scale in 6 protected areas of the OSA conservation area in Costa Rica.
antes de iniciar el relato de lo que
Before starting to
la
talk
experiencia que he venido a comentarles,
about the experience that I want to share with you today, I would like to talk to you about the way in which on the past century we had these plans for management, depending on how you can call them on each country. First of all, they were documents that had the highest technical level possible due to the fact that they were designed by specialists that were usually not a part of the protected area management because they needed a higher level,
la participación de los actores
and
locales
also the participation of local stakeholders and members of the management team was foreseen just for information purposes, or people that you would ask questions only, but they
sobre el
were
diseño del plan.
not able to make decisions regarding this design.
Otro elemento era que
Another element was that they should focus on the protected area individually, like an island at individual level. So they were not looking at the environment as a whole. And due to its cost, they were also seen as history milestones on the protected area. So the world would almost come to a stop when they started with the process because the cost was so high and it was so hard to get the specialists that this was not commonly done. And on the history of the protected area, they were considered rigid instruments because there was no possibility to adapt them, and it was not easy to continue with these processes. And a high percentage of cases in Latin America and the Caribbean, they were not implemented. Many of these plans were never executed.
hoy en día hemos venido cambiando estas
We
anteriores
have been changing these practices and making planning a good tool for governance with the goal of being a tool for guidance purposes in the future. This presentation has the purpose of sharing an experience in which we made a great effort to break all these old paradigms and to make more sense with a holistic sense of this tool. So now that I already made this comment, we're going to get to know about the experience on the preparing of the management plans of 6 protected areas of the ACOSA or OSA conservation area. This was developed thanks to an alliance of 3 institutions. The first is an academic institution, the Latin American School of Protected Areas, which contributed to the design and facilitation of the process in addition to a counterpart in kind that helped this process. And also the Nature Conservancy, known as the TNC, that helped us with technical support and supervision in addition to a strong financial support, which was basically the one that gave us the cash flow for this project. And also the OSA Conservation Area, a public institution in charge of the environmental management of the territory that gave us technical support, supervision, information, social management, and strong logistics support. We're going to go to our small country, Costa Rica, in the middle of the Americas. And this is a map of Costa Rica. Well, it's not very up to date, but in here we can see in green the protected areas, and in orange we see the biological corridors. And just as reference of the conservation blocks that we have in our country. The whole country has been divided into 11 regions known as conservation areas. So the conservation areas in Costa Rica are regions that have an environmental management for the whole territory. In our case, we're going to go to this region that is OSA, the OSA conservation area, and this is where we developed our project. These are the protected areas of that region, and the number represents the management category corresponding to the different characteristics, because it can be 1B, which is very strict, and then number 2, national parks, and then we have category 3, and also for multiple use categories like 6. And just for you to have an idea, I'm going to show you some views of the region. I'm going to mention quickly some of the elements that are related to the natural resources that we have in the region. The OSA conservation area is considered one of the regions with the highest biodiversity in our country, both for land and coastal and marine elements. And we also have great landscape, a great submarine life. And we also have tropical rainforests with great biodiversity that have emblematic species for the country and the region as a whole. Now we're going to talk about its people and its economy. This is an area where we have pristine protected areas, but some other areas have great communities with all the inhabitants as well. And we also have productive activities. And we also have small startups, people that are looking for a better way of life, and a great social organization, because in this area we see many organizations of a social kind. And we also have a live culture, we have history, and people with very interesting life stories. We also have illegal gold mining, and we also have poaching or illegal hunting, also logging or timber extraction, that is illegal as well, drug trafficking, fires, and the pressure of extensive activities. And now I am going to talk to you about what we did. First, the process required a great effort for the methodological design and previous preparation in order to execute the project, because this project took 3 years, and during the first year we worked on the preparation of the methodological design, information gathering, and other elements, all of them to prepare for this planning process for these 6 areas. As for the preparation, we held meetings or activities with the different officers of the protected areas of the OSA conservation area, or ACOSA. And this area is part of CNAC, of the National System of Conservation Areas in Costa Rica, which are those 11 that I already mentioned, and they are in charge of all the environmental topics. In general, we held meetings with them so that we could come to an agreement regarding some topics that were important, like doing like an internal cleansing before we worked with the communities. And also, as part of the preparation, we have meetings with the local stakeholders that have been proposed to be a part of the planning teams that I'm going to explain now. These meetings were held on different places, and we have different meetings at different times, but we needed people from different organizations, and we told them about the whole process and everything that was going to happen as part of this project, and also what their participation would be like. And those that agreed to the conditions of the process would run to be a part, or apply to be a part of these teams. So the planning teams were going to be the ones in charge of the design of the plan. So we created 6 planning team, 1 per each protected area. And these teams could have 25 people tops, out of which 15 officers would be from the OSA conservation area and 10 local stakeholders as a minimum. So on some occasions, when we wanted to have more local stakeholders, we had to decrease the number of officers. But in none of these 6 groups, we could have less than 10 local stakeholders. So what we saw in most of the cases was that we have up to, I don't know, 18 local stakeholders, and the others were officers of the OSA conservation area. As I said before, this was a very complex process from the methodological standpoint, but I would like to mention the ones that are most important for governance. First, the dedication of the people that participated was incredible. We had 8 workshops per team and 2 days each. So the people that participated had to dedicate 16 days of their work. So it would total 128 hours. So during the first 3 workshops or 6 days were dedicated to training on ecosystem aspects, social, economic, and management aspects of the protected area. So the idea was for them not to make decisions unless they already have this training for everyone that were a part of this team. We also had at least 1 field trip, 2 days, in addition to the 16 days that I already mentioned, and we established the consensus for decision making as the basis or qualified voting with 80% in favor of a motion. The use of tools and facilitation techniques were basic, and also the facilitation team of ELAP would have to process all the texts or the documents, but based on the decisions of the team. And an important decision was the final contents of the documents and the plans that would be submitted for the officialization process would be decided by the teams. They were going to give the input for the generation of this final document. And by using pictures of all these workshops, I am going to explain some elements that I think are important. First, a great effort was made to integrate representatives of different sectors on these planning teams, particularly from those sectors that were related or have a direct association to the management of the different protected areas. So their workshops became continuous spaces for negotiation. This picture shows when we were discussing the zoning of one of these marine protected areas, the biological reserve of Isla del Caño. And these are the sectors that these actors belonged to. So this is basically a negotiation table among the different sectors to define the zoning elements. And in general, all workshops throughout the process of the 6 protected areas were continuous spaces for negotiation. So we had to develop a great effort, energy, and technology to allow for these negotiations to flow in the best way possible. On many of the teams, we have more local stakeholders than officers because we were defining things that these social actors were interested in. So they wanted to be a part of it. And we had great pressure in order to have more than 10 local participants, as we had foreseen in the beginning. A key element was the training provided by the group of facilitators or the people that we have here, in addition to myself, of course, and each one of them trained on different topics. For example, in the case of Claudine, she She was a specialist on ecological aspects, and Edgar on production and entrepreneurship. Vicky was a trainer on the legal framework for the things that for them to know what they could or could not do. And last, they were also trained on management, which is the role that I played in addition to facilitator of the workshops. So this is the framework of the management of these protected areas and other elements that were part of the management of these areas. We also work on integration because all these people had a lot of negotiation to do, so they were also prepared to be able to participate, to have the confidence to propose their own ideas. So we had this great environment for negotiations with different techniques in order for them to be able to negotiate on the best way possible. And also, we explained to them what the process would be like when it comes to the methodology, and we use different facilitation techniques like maps, cards, papers, and other facilitation tools. And once we completed the 3 workshops or the 6 initial days of training, we started working on the design of the plan. And also for each of these aspects, we use the different facilitation techniques in order for them to be able to define the elements that we would include on a plan. And also, when it comes to the diagnose, they conducted the analysis of the different problems like the causes, and they also came up with strategies in order to lower these threats to key elements or conservation elements. Along with different methodologies, they started generating all these charts. And for the social assessment, because we wanted the people to obtain benefits from these areas, they also worked with their own lists of the possible activities related to production, for example, and they also prioritized the ones that were more appropriate. And also, when it comes to management, they conducted their own analysis, and they also use their own ideas and everything that was going on in the country back then. And they also use a SWOT analysis and also the viabilities by contributing with the elements and local knowledge of the officers, in this case, based on the different facilitation techniques, and also with a vision of open standards, as we would call it today. And this was the dynamic for all workshops. First, we started with the methodological training, specifically for the areas on which they were going to be making decisions on, and how will they make these decisions. And then they started working in groups along with the instructions so that they would come up with a proposal. And then they presented the proposal to the rest of the members of the group. And during the last session, we had to approve the proposal. We also had field trips, as I mentioned. And these were useful for some of the team members to get to know the areas and get to know each other and their positions, aspirations, and to get to know those that were not active participants in the process. So we defined all types of key aspects like zoning And at the end of each process, each one of the planning teams for their own protected areas were able to define all those elements that I included on this slide. And the technical level was adequate to the area, but most of all, they did it with the consensus of all the groups that participated. And this is going to break all the paradigms that we had in the beginning. And this is another possibility to work with social stakeholders, coming to a consensus from the creation of the whole planning process. And this is part of what was defined. This is a proposal for the zoning of the Golfo Dulce Reserve, which is a category 6. And this is for the Corcovado National Park. And I would like to call your attention to this slide now, where we have the two different zoning. And the teams worked in a coordinated manner, so they did things for the whole region, because the teams were working in coordination for the planning of the individual areas to make sense as a whole. For example, they took into consideration the connectivity lines for different species in order to define the zoning. In dark green, we have the areas with more restrictions, and on light green, the areas where we could not have important alterations, and in orange, where we can have some alterations of the ecosystem, and in red, where we have the human settlements. And this makes sense. And it was possible thanks to the groups working together. And also at municipality level, they had proposals. For example, these are the current protected areas, and these were proposals for the expansion of these protected areas, and also proposals for new areas to be considered in the future. And I would like to use these last minutes to answer some questions that I was sent. What challenges and achievements have you seen in your experience in terms of the involvement and consensus between the groups of interest in order to improve the management of the protected areas? Well, we thought we were going to have much more difficulties than we did in order to attain a consensus, but this was not the case, because honestly, based on the knowledge and the interaction of the different representatives that we have as part of our planning teams, we were able to attain a consensus and to come to an agreement very fast by knowing the limitations that we had and the different problems of getting out of this framework. So I think that the training was an element that helped us attain all of this, because the consensus was reached very fast. The challenges and achievements in terms of organization and to have the capacities for a good governance, well, it required a great effort and energy when it comes to the methodology and logistics, but it was worth it, because this really helped the rest of the process. So we need to work on this area. And of course, we're going to require the financial resources for all these processes. Mainly to try and finance activities for mobilization, logistics, food, and many other things required for the development of these participation activities. But the capacities were very interesting. The 25 members of the planning team were now with the strong skills in order to work on this, and what regulations were necessary for the operation of the experience. Well, we didn't need anything in particular, but we definitely needed a decisive public policy when it comes to work on this in a participative manner, and how to apply the framework for the governance techniques, principles, or policies to an understanding between the different actors of groups of interest. Well, we used all techniques possible participating processes, which were really important, principles like respect of rights, and also principles for decision making in a but with a consensus as the best alternative. And as I mentioned, a public policy that established that they would respect everything that these 25 people would come up with as a document for the officialization. And what are the main challenges to establish a good governance in the protected area and on a landscape scale? Well, in this particular experience, one of the main challenges was to obtain the trust of all these people, of all the participants, to be able to generate all these agreements, to have all these dialogues in the good sense, I mean, for this governance on a landscape scale, because I would say that trust is the most important element in order to attain all these processes. Well, this is the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to share with you my experience. And thank you for it. I would like to thank the Nature Conservancy and the OSA Conservation for the support. Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you for your presentation. We would like to apologize because can you all listen to me? Okay, thank you. I saw on the chat that some people were having some audio problems, but I would like to thank Stanley for being so clear on your concepts. It was a very interesting presentation. I would like to thank all our speakers because it's been great. It's a luxury to be able to have you here. And without further ado, would like to open a space for questions and answers. And I would like to thank the speakers that have already been answering some of the questions on the chat, which is going to expedite all these questions because we don't have much time. We only have a half hour left. So I would like to ask Alan and Vero from ELAP if you are ready, because they have been systemizing all of these questions for our speakers. So Vero, would you like to start? I think that we are going to have one per speaker, one for Guillermo, one for Diana, and one for Stanley. The first question for Guillermo: how do you process on the Council of the Mosaic the different conflict when it comes to access or exclusion of the land for the regional areas? Well, in the beginning of this mosaic, during the first planning, we had a program, specific program for the solution of territorial conflicts, which was based on solving things that were related to the boundaries and also possession and categories. For example, the fact that we have, for example, a park, because under the Brazilian law, the category of park, we could not have people living in, but they are communities on the inside anyhow. So these are some errors in the process of the boundaries of these protected areas. So, for example, the people should not live there, but we've seen these experiences and they were a disaster. So we had this goal of helping the public agencies and the government and the populations so that we could have a process for the redefinition of these boundaries for all these areas. And Currently, I would say that all these problems that are related to the land or people have been solved. There are only a couple of things that are in the hands of the government today, so that the governor can sign them once it is ready in order to see how we're going to manage a park. So it can be managed as a park, but we are not going to lose the conservation area, for example, in order to have sustainable development and things that are being currently discussed. And as a result of this, as part of this new action plan for the mosaic, we have not covered all these topics for the discussion of territorial conflict because they were addressing precisely these questions. But these are things that are now being discussed during the council of the conservation units or the individual communities. So some things that are quite complicated, there might need to be taken to the council in order to come up with a solution to support the individual units or individual protected areas. But as with all the territories that are part of the mosaic, we do not have too many discussions, and they end up being solved in terms of each protected area. And the only thing that we are currently discussing as a region are the fishing aspects. As I said, the Avillanos and other communities around the park, and we are taking on these discussions. But these discussions are part of the Council of the National Park of Avellanas, but not the mosaic. Thank you, Guillermo. A question. What about public consultation? Do you take into account the different opinions and how do you formalize them? Yes, we do take into consideration the idea of getting all stakeholders involved. The idea is to come up with a proposal for the zoning plan based on the officers that we have in the park and the needs and what has been going on. We take into consideration and then we come up with a proposal. And as an institution, we make a proposal for the zoning plan, and then this is discussed, as I said, and once it is ready, once we have included all the different proposals from the different stakeholders, we show these to the people, and then it is discussed and revised. And then as an institution, we take this to the central management, where we go over the legal aspects as well. And then it is sent to the ministry, and then they do their own revision, and then it goes to the Council of Ministers, and then it is approved by the President of the Republic. And this is the process that we need to comply with. But once we get this into Caracas, we have all the opinions and everything that we have from each stakeholder. Thank you, Diana. And now a question for Stanley. Who financed this process, and how much resources did you need? Well, it was financed by the three organizations, the ELAP, the OSA Conservation Area, and the Nature Conservancy. We all contributed with our resources one way or the other to this process, for like human resources, logistics, but the Nature Conservancy gave us much of the cash flow. For example, money to pay for food, or sometimes we needed it to pay, I don't know, or to rent a place where we would hold these meetings, and some things that required a cash flow. But in general, you you try to think that this is the only thing you need. When it comes to the systemation, we calculated what we have received from the communities and the participants, because during those days where they were not working, they were not receiving anything. So I think that this is a part of the process. So we should talk about another source of financing, because the social stakeholders might not have contributed with money as part of the cash flow, but with their time, which is really valuable. And for example, the Nature Conservancy that contributed with cash flow, and the also conservation area, and which is part of the state, and ELAP that was the designer and facilitator of the process. So the project with the Nature Conservancy was approximately $4,000. No, I would say 30,000 just for the plan, but in total 180,000 for the 3 years. But in real terms, I think it's going to be higher, but it was the first time that we were doing something like this, so there were some uncertainties. So it was things that it was like a try and error. So we find the things that we needed to change for the next time. So I think that the cost is high, and these are things that we need to learn along the way and to find for the different mechanisms so that we can cut costs. I think that in this case, this was an experimental process. It was the initial process, and it could be repeated at a lower cost once we have all this experience. Thank you, Stanley. Alan, another round of questions that you can identify? I just wanted to know if you're paying attention. That's why I was on mute. So there is a question for the three speakers from Claudia Núñez. So it is clear that when you try to implement the protected areas given by international cooperation, and these great NGOs like we see in the case of FOSA. But the question is now in 2021, where international cooperation has been reduced in Latin America, what are the challenges that you should visualize for an effective governance of protected areas with not as many resources from international cooperation, and how to balance the powers of those that provide the different authorities, environmental? So within the framework of these challenges, what can we do? Guillermo, would you like to start? Well, the lack of resources, of course, is going to be a problem. Well, lack of resources, and also, as I said, the legal attacks to the participation and representation. So we have many spaces for discussions that have been paralyzed, but in spite of that, we have been able to do important mobilizations. And the fact that we are in the midst of this pandemic has resulted in more tools for training, like, I don't know, the internet, smartphones. Of course, it is not ideal, but it's the best we can do with what we have. And I think that we are about to be able to go back out on the field, and we are already seeing the difficulties of not having enough resources in order to do everything, because we still depend on cooperation projects. And of course, there are some initiatives like the ARPA project and others with donations from international organizations, and we also have the GEF and other funds, environmental world funds, and some projects from the World Bank that had been incorporated to the public sector to support this mobilization. But as I said, the biggest problem now in addition to the lack of resources, are going to be the political things. How can we ensure participation and representation? So we are in, on this transition where we are trying to go to face-to-face activities. And I think that this is an important moment to evaluate everything. Thank you, Guillermo. Diana? Well, the our budget is really scarce. However, what's important is to get the involvement of all stakeholders, because each one, by involving all of them, they are going to take on this responsibility in order to execute this management on one hand. And also we need to apply all these projects that we have currently on this management plan, because in addition to the zoning and regulation use, we have a management plan for the parks on the different environments where we have different projects. So we have this articulation with the researchers and the people that are working on a project based on all these environments that we find inside the management plan and the NGOs. This articulation with NGOs is really important for the work that we are currently doing, and this is our strategy to be able to work with the resources that we have. Thank you, Diana. Stanley? Well, it's an interesting question from Claudia. And like we say in Costa Rica, if we don't have a cocoa, we cannot make a chocolate. And this is the truth. The resources are necessary, but what's interesting is how many resources and where they come from. And this is the point of it. Evidently, if we want to do things that we want to impose, and if we want to do things in an isolated manner, we're going to need much more resources to operate by ourselves as part of this landscape. But if we come up with alliances and we have agreements with the different stakeholders, and then I agree with Diana, and if we are more horizontal on the work that we conduct, we are going to need less resources from a single institution in order to be able to do things, because we'll have allies or institutions in the territory that can join us. But coming to this point is going to require a great effort towards this alliance, of this horizontal alliance with all the stakeholders, and it's going to require the management efforts and a governance focus in order to attain these alliances and to be able to accommodate all interests into a single thing. And we need to adapt, and not only wait for everyone to adapt to us, because we need to think that we also need to adapt to other people's interests. And if we were able to do that, and if we could have a common vision, and if we could harmonize this vision and create all these alliances, I would say that the cost for these processes were going to be much more less, because they will be shared and there's no fighting in order to attain things. So I think that maybe the solution is not to think that we will not need international cooperation, because I think that that's a really important source of financing, but we need to think and visualize how a different source for the management could be territorial alliances. Alliances out there on the field, and to take a look at the different resources and to see these allies as something really important for the management of the area, and to have local organizations and also from the civil society, but also municipalities and parts of the government and allies in order to reduce costs and to help us to bridge these gaps. And I would say that there are two ways to bridge a gap. One would be by reducing it, and the other to get in the funds. And then we should try to reduce the financial gap by reducing the operation costs of the institution by sharing them, like Diana said, among all the stakeholders, and creating alliances, and then things would be less expensive. Thank you. Very good. We have one last round of questions. If you want to keep on asking questions, then you can send them on the chat, and then we'll go over them and try to answer as many as we can. And then we'll ask our speakers to keep on answering questions. So if you don't get an answer, the people responsible are the speakers that I just asked help from. I lost my connection. Well, we have 8 questions. Participation mechanisms are always trying to find an institution that is going to manage the organization. But in the case of communities, we don't take a step back. So we need to gather all the communities in order to discuss the situation of the community along with the protected areas. So the expectations and commitments and so on. This would allow for representatives that are going to be discussing the planning could really represent the voice of the communities. Have any of you go through this stage for the organization of the communities? Well, on the specific case of Mosaic, all acting partners in the region, especially those that have been there for the longest time, involved at some level with this direct contact. I think that someone else asked a question in relation to how to ensure this participation or representation of the local communities on the council. So I think that this is something that we do not interfere with, because the communities are going to have their own protected areas, and they're going to have the resources for the different meetings at local level. But in some specific cases, if there is a need for an answer or a document, then we need to have a specific mobilization or to take the people and to make these decisions and to have representation. So we are always involved one way or the other before we act. So I think that this is fundamental. In the case of the Mosaic specifically, we have 2 groups of governance in relation to a protected area: the council for consultation purposes and others, because the council is a consultation type. They can vote on some things in order to prepare a report, document, or indication, but there is no guarantee for this to be considered or taken later by the managers. But when it comes to protected areas, and they have another type of council that can discuss and debate. So it's very interesting when it comes to the articulation, because the government representatives are going to participate on this council of the Mosaic. So there's this need for all decisions that are being made by the council, by a consultation council, to be as round as possible in order to be respected or implemented. Diana and Stanley. And after this last question, we're going to give 1 minute to the speakers if you like to make some closing remarks. Diana? Yes, before we started with the preparation of the plan, we met, as you were able to see on the slide, informal meetings with the communities. We talked to the communities to get to know what was going on and what their interests were, what they wanted to report, and what their concerns were in relation to the national park. And we have community councils, which we have in the different communities. depending on how they organize each community. And we started meeting with them regardless of the person participating or not, of their being a part of the council or not. Or then we would go to the community and go directly to the people. And in the beginning, I'm talking about 6 years ago, it took us 6 years because someone asked about how long it took us, but it's still going on because the socialization is continuous, because we don't want to lose all the work that we've conducted so far. And as we went through the park, we were able to discuss with the people first before making the proposal. So we were able to listen to the people, to get to know them, and to be able to maintain this feedback. Stanley? Well, it's a very good question. And I would like to tell you a story while we were meeting with the different local groups before this process. And when I told them about how wonderful this project was going to be, because we were convinced that it was going to be wonderful indeed, and we had deficiencies and problems, but it was good. But we were convinced that this was the eighth wonder of the world, and we were telling everyone that they should be a part of this management plan. So someone raised his hand, this sir, and said, "Can I ask you a question?" Yeah. Can we define during this process that we do not want to have a protected area? And then we said, no, of course not. So can we decide not to be a park, but to be, I don't know, a recreation area where anyone can live? And then we said, no, we can't. So he said, well, then I don't understand. So you already defined the game you want to play, the field where we're going to play, and the rules, but you're just inviting us to play. And then I understood the difference between management and governance because of this question, because I, they left me without words during this workshop with the people from the communities. And that's the clarity, because they need to know how they can participate. So empowering them before is fundamental, but we're going to have a problem, those of us who have been working on the participative planning, because many of these managers use this planning process in order to open this participation, and then once they go through this project they close it, so the communities will no longer have a voice, or they will not visit the communities, so there's no interaction. And then they invite them to a workshop. So they go to the workshop, and then the people start complaining and saying that they have so many problems and they want all land problems solved. So we have a different agenda to the workshop. And why? Because there is no governance, participatory governance as a process, but just as an act that you want to solve through during this workshop. So I think that the initial preparation of the communities is fundamental, because they need to be prepared before this plan or before this workshop. They need to be prepared for the self-management of their own territories. And I think that this is something that is going to require support and many years to start creating the foundations. And once you have the foundation, and the communities are empowered, and once they are clear about what they want and about their needs and the needs for conservation, then they can start with this participatory plan, and it's going to be much more easier with the no need to see if they represent or not the organizations. So I would like to call your attention about this question, because I don't think that it's not this cosmetic sense that we should put on these processes when it comes to participation for these processes, because I think that we should have this management of the areas, but with the participation in a democratic manner throughout the project by having the social foundation in order for people to be able to participate in all these processes in a legitimate manner and with representation in an informed manner as well, but also in a responsible manner so that they can make their own decisions in a responsible manner as well for their own resources. It's not just to prepare people for a workshop. They need to be prepared as a social stakeholder for the self-management of their own territories, and that is the real challenge. Excellent. Thank you, Stanley. So now you're going to have 1 minute each with some final remarks. Or if there is anything that you want to mention as key. And for everyone else, I would like to ask all of you to get ready because then we'll take a picture. So if you're still in bed, if you're in your pajamas, then you can go and wash your faces. You have, because after this 3 minutes, we'll take the picture. So nice to see so many people smiling. Well, we missed our coffee break, right? Well, it's so sad not to have a coffee break. Well, this reflection that Stanley made is really interesting because many of the territories that we work on or the communities have not been even consulted about the processes, but luckily we're going to introduce changes in the legislation that are going to allow for most of the people to go through this consultation process, and now they have the conditions to work in an integrated manner and to make all the adjustments in form and to see how they will work, where they should be. And these mosaics especially have really helped to guide all these demands. And during the last point, I would just like to reflect upon the questions that I have been asked, and human resources, financial resources are always be present in the different political situations. This pandemic have been important challenges in our personal lives as professionals and as human beings and those out there in the field to define how we're going to work. And we need to adjust to this process of reopening, gradual reopening of activities after this pandemic to be able to support those that need our support. Because the fight will continue and hopefully we'll keep on advancing and reaching more places. And I would like to thank you all for this very good morning. And I am going to share my contact information on the chat. You already have the social media of the Mosaic so that you can follow us and give us and like us as well. And we are here if there is anything you need. Thank you. Thank you, Guillermo. Diana? Well, the most important thing to learn is how important the involvement is, the inclusion of all people. Because we should not exclude any group. And the challenges when it comes to gender inclusion, in our case, it was never a challenge because women have always participated on this type of consultations and they are going to have their space. So it was a very good experience as a whole. And one of the most important points, as Stanley mentioned, is to maintain what we've achieved so far. Because when you get the trust of the communities and the institutions and all stakeholders, we need to be able to maintain it and to keep on working, because people should not feel deceived and to say, well, we were not involved, we were not taken into consideration for decision-making purposes, and someone else asked about the final decision, because we as an institutions are going to make that final decision, but always taking into consideration all points of view and based on our legal framework, of course. And it's important to be able to adapt and to listen to the rural and urban communities. And as Stanley said as well, these are things that happen. Some people go through a proposal and say, well, we don't want this to be a national park because we would like to live there and to be able to build or, I don't know, or have a plantation. And it's important to understand all of these ideas. And I also shared my contact info. So I'm here if there is anything you need. And the same for the team that worked with me. And we have part of the team that worked on the preparation of this zoning plan for Chorro Indio. So thank you again for your time and attention. Thank you. Stanley? Well, participatory governance does not mean that we should waive our goals, but we need to complement them with the others, because we should all work together. And I think that this is really important. We should not think that when we have a participatory governance, we are going to lose anything. We are going to have a more important power, but we need to come to an agreement, and that implies negotiation before an agreement. And second, the government should not abandon its presence on the territory. It's not about having this process, and once they are completed, then it's going to be only up to local stakeholders to decide about everything, because the government should always have a presence and to support and be there working hand in hand with the processes on protected areas, regardless of, because they will be managed by the government, but they should have a presence out there on the field. And the difference that I see here is that we should not have this authoritarian presence, but we should generate agreements, alliances, and to guide the governance processes towards the self-management that is going to be much more efficient in the territory. And third, for those of you that are here today who are officers, heads, authorities involved in the management of protected areas, don't think that you need a great amount of money and too many resources before starting working on participatory processes. Simply start by talking. Go out there and talk to your communities, sit down with the communities. And I talk about my own experience. I passed by in my car through the communities, but I should stop and start establishing relationship with people. And once you start doing that, and once you get the trust of the people, then the information is going to flow much better. And then you'll have a knowledge that you did not have before. And then you can apply all of these to the communities. And once you have this, then you should have the trust of the people. And then you'll have a link. And then you can start working on this governance. So don't wait before you have a structured workshop financed by an international organization before you do anything nice. Nice would be to sit down with the people in a community and to learn from them so that they can see you and establishing this relationship with them. I think that for this, you will not need financing nor technology. So what you need is a positive attitude. And those are my final remarks. Thank you, Stanley. So now we're going to take a picture. So I would like your best smile. We are almost on the weekend, so Paula, can you help us with this screenshot? We need your biggest smile. You can keep on smiling for 15 minutes at least. Please smile. Please do not write now while I take the picture. And if you want to say something nice also that we can all keep smiling. Keep on smiling, please. Oh, well, keep on smiling, please. I was joking about the 15 minutes, but I think it's going to take us 15 minutes. Keep on smiling, please. We have recorded this meeting. Okay. Thank you, Paula. The webinar has been recorded, and then by mail, you're going to get a message. You need to register for all the different webinars, so you'll get a link and you have to go through the process so that hopefully we'll see you on all our webinars. And then, of course, we will be sharing this video conference that has been recorded in case you missed a part of it. Well, on our behalf, I would like to tell you that questions that have not been answered, we'll try to send to the speakers for them to answer as many as we can. Thank you again. And Christina, for the official closing. Thank you, Alan. So some keywords that I have been able to rescue from this morning and from the presentations and questions. I think that this building horizontal genuine alliances is a key to identify the common interests and also to strengthen the capacities of the different stakeholders in order to be able to promote their participation and good governance, and also understand and accept that these processes are going to have ups and downs and they're going to take time. And I think that we should be working on this on our daily basis among all the stakeholders. And this is something that we need to accept as part of this challenge and as part of the process for the management of protected areas. Those are the ideas that I rescued. So once again, thank you, and would like to invite you to follow us on Facebook, where we will be sharing all the information. You see a link on the chat, and you can follow us on Facebook, where we will be sharing all other webinars on the cycle, and then you will be able to register. So without further ado, thank you again, and I will see you next week.